The charter didn't land. The storm pushed it back to a regional strip 20 miles west of Cedar Hollow, Virginia, and Laura Keating stood under the overhang of a one-room terminal with her phone dead and her heels sinking into wet gravel. A blue pickup idled at the curb. The driver loaded a wooden crate into the bed, rain flattening his hair, his flannel soaked through. He saw her, looked at the sky, looked back. "You need a ride?" She did. "Where are you headed?" "Cedar Hollow." He stopped moving. "That's where I live." She climbed in. The cab smelled like machine oil and cold coffee. A brass compass was mounted on the dashboard, its needles swinging once and settling. Neither of them spoke for the first mile. The sign for Cedar Hollow appeared in the headlights, and Laura's hand tightened on her bag. She knew that name. She'd been reading it in acquisition files for 3 months. What she didn't know yet was what that town, and the man sitting next to her, were about to cost her. Stay for this one. Adam Paxton's shop sat at the end of Riddle Lane, a corrugated steel building his father had put up in 1978 on 3 acres of land that had been in the family since before the county paved the road. The sign out front read Paxton Precision. No logo, no website, just a phone number and a reputation that brought contracts from as far as Roanoke and Charlotte. He was 38, mechanical engineer by training. He'd spent 6 years at Northfield Defense in Arlington designing turbine housings for naval propulsion systems, until the division was eliminated in a corporate restructuring that cut 1,100 positions on a single Thursday afternoon. He drove home to Cedar Hollow that weekend with a severance check and a box of personal items that fit in the passenger seat. The shop had been his father's woodworking garage. Adam stripped it down, poured a new floor, installed a CNC lathe he bought at a government surplus auction, and started bidding on precision machining jobs. It took 2 years to turn a profit. By the 3rd year, he employed 8 people from town. His wife had been gone 3 years. A car accident on Route 17, black ice, a logging truck that crossed the center line. Adam didn't talk about it. The evidence lived in small details. Her coat still hung on the hook by the back door. A pair of gardening gloves sat on the windowsill above the kitchen sink, right where she'd left them. And every Saturday morning his son Sam would set 2 mugs on the table out of habit, then quietly put one back before Adam came downstairs. Sam was 10, quiet, watchful. On weekends he sat on a stool in the shop wearing safety glasses 2 sizes too big, handing Adam tools before Adam asked for them. He didn't say much, but he noticed everything. In Richmond, 140 miles east, Laura Keating ran the company her great-grandfather had founded, Keating Development Group. Commercial real estate, 42 employees, a portfolio of mid-Atlantic properties, and a board of directors who still remembered her father and measured her against him quarterly. She was 34. She'd taken the chair 4 years ago when her father's health forced his retirement, and she had spent every month since proving that the name on the building wasn't the only reason she held it. Douglas Crane was her VP of acquisitions. 52 years old, 20 with the company. He'd survived 2 leadership transitions and knew every file, every vendor relationship, every procedural shortcut in the organization. When Laura took over, Crane was the one who walked her through the active portfolio, explained the county contacts, introduced her to the brokers. She trusted him the way people trust the one who shows them where the light switches are. 3 months earlier, Crane had brought her Cedar Hollow, a small parcel in the Shenandoah foothills, undervalued land adjacent to a decommissioned rail spur. Willing seller, he said. Fast close. Minimal exposure. He presented it as routine. Laura approved the preliminary review and moved on to the next item. She had never visited the site. The storm changed that. Her charter to the Shenandoah Regional Airport was diverted to a county strip with no rental car counter and no cell signal. Adam Paxton happened to be at the same field, picking up a custom bearing shipment that had arrived on a cargo hop from Richmond. He saw a woman in a white dress standing alone in the rain, and he offered what anyone in Cedar Hollow would have offered: a ride. They talked on the way. He mentioned the shop, the bearing, the road conditions in the valley when rain came through like this. She listened. She didn't say why she was coming to Cedar Hollow. When they reached town, he dropped her at the Hollow Inn, the only lodging, and said good night. She watched his taillights disappear down Riddle Lane and stood in the gravel lot with her bag in her hand and rain still coming down. She didn't sleep that night. She sat on the bed with her laptop open and Crane's acquisition file on the screen, and for the first time, she read every page. The next morning, Laura walked to the target parcel. Crane's file described it as vacant land adjacent to a decommissioned rail spur, suitable for light commercial redevelopment, minimal existing structures. It was not vacant. It was not minimal. It was Adam Paxton's machine shop. She stood across Riddle Lane and watched through the open bay door. Adam was running the CNC lathe, sparks arcing in clean lines, his hands steady on the feed control. Shipping crates lined the far wall, labels addressed to aerospace contractors in Virginia Beach, tooling companies in Greensboro, a defense subcontractor in Huntsville. Production schedules were pinned to a corkboard by the door. This was not abandoned land with a shed on it. This was a working operation with clients and contracts and a crew that showed up every morning. She pulled up Crane's file on her phone and scrolled to the consent document. Seller, A. Paxton. Signature, dated March 14th. She enlarged the signature on the screen and studied it. Then she walked to the front of the shop and looked at the business license posted in the window beside the door, Adam's name on the county registration form, signed in his own hand, dated 3 years earlier. She held her phone next to the glass. The two signatures were nothing alike. The slant was different. One leaned left, the other sat upright. The spacing was wrong. The A in Adam on the consent didn't match the A on the license. The loop on the P in Paxton curved in the opposite direction. Not a single stroke was consistent. She didn't go inside. She walked back to the inn and called Crane. The parcel's not vacant, Douglas. There's a machine shop operating on it. Employees. Shipping contracts. Crane didn't hesitate. Cold feet from the seller. It happens. I'll handle it when I'm down there next week. Did he actually sign the consent? Laura, I've been doing this for 20 years. The paperwork is clean. She hung up. She pulled the consent document onto her laptop and set it beside the photo she'd taken of the business license. She stared at the two signatures for a long time. That afternoon, she went back to the shop. Not to confront anyone, just to look. She stood in the doorway and watched Adam hand a finished part to one of his machinists, a man in his 60s who held it under a magnifying light and nodded once. The tolerances at Paxton Precision were measured in thousandths of an inch. This was not a man looking to sell and walk away. She asked him, leaning against the doorframe, keeping her voice casual. You ever think about selling this place? Adam didn't look up from the blueprint he was marking. No. Nobody's approached you about buying? No. He said it the way a person says something that has never once been a question. Flat. Settled. Laura walked back to the inn. She sat on the edge of the bed with the file open and the forged signature on the screen and understood something she hadn't understood the night before. The man who had driven her here in the rain, the man with the compass on his dashboard and the child's backpack behind the seat, was the person her company was trying to take this from. And he had no idea. She was supposed to fly back to Richmond the next morning. She called her assistant and pushed her return by 3 days. She told herself it was due diligence. But she closed the acquisition file and didn't open it again that night. Cedar Hollow had 900 people, 1 traffic light, and a volunteer fire department that held pancake breakfasts on the first Saturday of every month. Laura walked the town the next morning and counted the things that depended on Adam Paxton's shop. The hardware store sold him fasteners and welding rod by the case. The diner fed his crew at lunch, a standing tab he settled every Friday. The woman who ran the post office shipped his finished parts 3 times a week and had memorized the routing codes for his top 6 clients. The gas station at the edge of town serviced his truck and the company van. 8 jobs in a town this size was not a number. It was a load-bearing wall. Remove it, and the whole structure shifts. She emailed Crane and requested the independent appraisal, not his summary, not the adjusted figure he'd provided in the project file. The original document from the county assessor's office. Crane replied 4 hours later. I'll send the summary this afternoon. She wrote back 1 line. I asked for the original. He didn't respond. That evening she ran into Adam at the diner. He was sitting alone at the counter with a cup of coffee and a parts catalog open to a page of high-speed bearings, and he looked up when she walked in. He seemed surprised she was still in town. Thought you were passing through, he said. I was. Plans changed. He didn't ask why. He moved the catalog to make room and went back to his coffee. She sat 2 stools down. The waitress brought her a menu without being asked. Small town. A stranger gets noticed, and a stranger who stays gets noticed twice. They talked, not about work or the shop. He told her what Cedar Hollow had been when the rail line was still running, the sawmill, the feed store, the two churches that used to compete for Sunday attendance. He told her what happened when the line closed in 2004, who stayed and who packed up, and how the town shrank by a third in 18 months. He talked about it the way someone talks about a place they chose to return to, not a place they ended up in by accident. No bitterness, no performance, just a man describing the ground under his feet and meaning every word of it. Laura asked fewer questions as the evening went on. Every answer made the file on her laptop feel heavier. Back at the inn, she opened her email. Still no original appraisal from Crane. She logged into the county assessor's public records portal and filed the request herself. The appraisal arrived 2 days later. The county assessor's independent valuation of the Paxton property, 3 acres, all structures, associated access rights, was $1.1 million. Crane's file listed $280,000. Laura placed the two numbers side by side on her screen. She read Crane's supporting notes one by one. Environmental remediation liability, restricted access easement, structural depreciation on non-conforming outbuildings. Then she checked every claim against the public record. The county environmental database showed no remediation flag on the parcel, no pending action, no contamination study initiated or requested. She pulled the easement registry for the township. No dispute filed, no restriction recorded, no encumbrance of any kind. She checked the building permit history. The outbuildings on the property were permitted, coded as light industrial, and had passed county inspection the previous year without a single citation. Every line of Crane's cost adjustment was built on something that did not exist. She called him. The county appraisal is 4 times your figure, Douglas. Walk me through that. County appraisals are retail valuations. We buy wholesale. I factored in remediation exposure, easement friction, and a timeline discount for a quick close. There's no remediation on file. Not yet, but the adjacent rail spur has potential contamination history. The buyer assumes that liability. We're the buyer. Silence on the line. Then, Laura, I've structured more than 30 acquisitions like this. The numbers are sound. She hung up. The numbers were not sound. She knew it. He knew she knew it. But she didn't have the full picture yet. Only a gap between 2 figures that no legitimate cost adjustment could bridge, and a VP who had an answer for every question but documentation for none of them. That evening she drove past the workshop. The lights were still on. Through the bay door she could see Adam alone at a drafting table, pencil behind his ear, marking up a blueprint after his crew had gone home hours ago. She pulled the rental car to the shoulder and sat there with the engine idling. The light from the shop fell in a clean rectangle across the gravel lot. The compass wasn't visible from here, but she knew where it was, sitting on the workbench or clipped to the dashboard of the truck parked by the door. A small brass object that always seemed to be wherever he was. She drove back to the inn. She didn't open Crane's file. She opened a blank document and began listing every discrepancy she'd found, in order, with dates. Laura went to the workshop 2 days later. She told herself it was operational due diligence, site assessment, the kind of review a CEO should conduct before authorizing any acquisition. But when Adam handed her a pair of safety glasses and walked her through the shop floor, she forgot about the file. He showed her the CNC lathe first, a rebuilt oak humor from the 90s that he'd reconditioned himself. Then the inspection station, where every finished part was measured against tolerance before it shipped. Then the logbook on the shelf beside the bench, where he recorded each job by hand, client name, material, tolerance spec, delivery date, outcome. 4 years of entries in the same steady handwriting, 1 line per job, no gaps. The compass sat on the corner of the workbench. She'd first seen it mounted on the dashboard the night of the storm. He moved it between the truck and the shop. Wherever he was working, the compass followed. "My father's," Adam said, when he saw her looking at it. He carried it when he surveyed timber lots for the county. Used to say you don't need to know where you're going. Just don't lose where you are. Laura picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. The brass was worn smooth on one side from decades of being held. That Saturday, the town held a fundraiser for the volunteer fire station. Laura hadn't planned to go. She'd meant to spend the day on documents. But the inn's owner mentioned it at breakfast, and by noon she found herself walking toward the firehouse. Adam was there, hauling folding tables out of a shed. Sam moved between the tables with two other kids, carrying stacks of napkins wrapped in rubber bands. Helen Paxton stood behind the serving line, ladling chili with the efficiency of a woman who had done this 40 times and intended to do it 40 more. When Laura approached, Helen looked at her. Not unfriendly, not warm. Measuring. "You're still here," Helen said. "I am." Helen handed her a ladle. Laura served chili for 2 hours. She talked to the fire chief, the postmaster, two of Adam's machinists, and a woman who taught 3rd grade at the elementary school. Nobody asked what she did for a living. They asked if she wanted more cornbread. That evening, after the crowd cleared, a black sedan appeared on Riddle Lane. Laura was walking back to the inn when she saw it. A rental that didn't belong in Cedar Hollow the way a press suit doesn't belong in a machine shop. She stopped at the corner and watched. Douglas Crane walked into Paxton Precision. Adam was inside, cleaning up. Laura couldn't hear the conversation through the closed bay door, but she could see the shape of it through the window. Crane talked. Adam listened with his arms folded. Crane gestured, broad, emphatic, the movements of a man presenting terms. Adam said something short. Crane's posture changed. He left the shop without a handshake. Laura pressed against the wall of the building across the street. Crane walked to his car, made a call, and drove off. He hadn't seen her. She looked back at the shop. Adam stood in the open doorway with the compass in his hand. He wasn't watching the road. He was looking at the ground. She found out the next morning what Crane had said. Adam told her at the diner, matter of fact, the same tone he used for everything. Some man from a development company came by. Said the county might exercise eminent domain for infrastructure. Told me I should sell now while I still had leverage. He took a sip of coffee. I told him no. Laura's hands were flat on the counter. She didn't lift them. "You know him?" Adam asked. "I might." He looked at her, waited. She didn't say more. He went back to his coffee. Laura walked back to the inn and stood in the parking lot. The black sedan was gone, but the damage it had come to do was still sitting in a folder on her laptop, and she was the one who had signed the authorization that set it in motion. That night, Laura opened every folder in the Cedar Hollow project directory on the Keating development server. Her credentials, her company, her right to see everything stored under its name. The consent document was there, Adam's forged signature, dated March 14th. The adjusted appraisal was there, $280,000, with Crane's notes attached. But beneath those files, in a subfolder she had never opened, she found 3 LLC registration documents. Ridgeline Properties, LLC. Shenandoah Hollow Partners, LLC. Creekside Capital, LLC. All 3 were registered in Virginia within the past 18 months. All 3 listed the same registered agent, a name Laura didn't recognize until she ran it through the state corporate database and matched it to Douglas Crane's wife's maiden name. She pulled the county land transfer records. Ridgeline had purchased a 40-acre parcel adjacent to Adams' property 9 months earlier. Shenandoah Hollow Partners had acquired 2 residential lots north of the rail spur 6 months ago. Creekside Capital had bought a defunct gas station and its half-acre lot 3 months ago. Every purchase was below market value. Every seller had received the same visit Adam had, a man in a rental car suggesting that eminent domain was on the way. Crane was not acquiring Cedar Hollow for Keating Development. He was using the company's name, its legal department, its letterhead, and its CEO's signature to pressure landowners into selling low, then routing the purchases through his own shell companies at prices the sellers would never have accepted without the threat. The resort development deal he was assembling with outside investors had nothing to do with Keating's portfolio. It never had. Laura pulled the board minutes from the previous 2 years. No discussion of Cedar Hollow. No strategic proposal. No vote. Crane had manufactured the entire project and inserted the preliminary authorization into a batch of routine multi-site approvals that Laura had signed during a quarterly review. She found the batch. 18 documents. Cedar Hollow was number 14, slipped between a parking lot resurfacing contract in Norfolk and a lease renewal in Fredericksburg. She had signed all 18 in one sitting. She remembered the meeting. She remembered Crane sliding the binder across the table and saying, "Standard quarterly package. Nothing out of the ordinary." Laura closed her laptop, opened it, read the shell company filings again, closed it again. She walked to the window. The inn faced Riddle Lane, and from the second floor, she could see the roof of Paxton Precision. The shop light was still on. She sat on the edge of the bed and placed the acquisition file next to the shell company records on the screen. The same parcels, the same town, the same man operating on both sides of the transaction, buying through one entity, authorizing through another, and pocketing the difference between the market value and the price he'd frightened the sellers into accepting. And Laura's name, her signature, on the document that made all of it legal. This had not been done to her company. It had been done through her company. Through her, specifically. Her name on the cover page. Her initials on the batch authorization. Her failure to read document 14 out of 18 on a Tuesday afternoon in a conference room in Richmond where she'd been in a hurry to get to the next meeting. She sat in that room with the files open and the shop light visible through the glass, and understood what she had been a part of. The man who had driven her here in the rain, who had told her his father's words about the compass and never once asked what she did for a living. That man was Douglas Crane's target, and she had signed the instrument that made the targeting legal. She'd come to Cedar Hollow to evaluate a routine acquisition. Now she was sitting in a motel room at midnight staring at evidence that the acquisition was a fraud, and her name was on every page that mattered. She found Crane at the inn the next morning. He'd driven back. A different rental, the same press suit. He was sitting in the small breakfast room with his laptop open and a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. Laura sat across from him. She placed her phone on the table, screen down. Ridgeline Properties. Shenandoah Hollow Partners. Creekside Capital. She said each name without rushing. All registered to your wife's maiden name. All purchasing Cedar Hollow parcels below market value. All timed to your acquisition schedule. Crane looked at her. He did not deny it. He did not explain. You forged Adam Paxton's signature on a consent document. You suppressed the county appraisal and substituted your own number. You manufactured a project that doesn't appear on any strategic plan and buried the authorization in a batch you knew I'd sign without reviewing each page. Crane closed his laptop. Slowly. Laura, your signature is on every preliminary authorization for this project. Every single one. You go public with this, you come down with me. I signed a batch. You signed the documents. That's what the record will show. A CEO who authorized the acquisition of private land using a forged consent. How does that look? Laura kept her hands on the table. I signed 18 documents in one sitting. Cedar Hollow was number 14. You buried it. Prove the sequence. He picked up his coffee and took the first sip. His hand was steady. He'd had 20 years to learn how to hold a room. He was holding this one. Laura didn't look away. I don't need to prove the sequence to know what you did. And neither will the board. Then take it to them. And explain how 4 years of your leadership missed every single flag. I'm going to. Then we both go down. Maybe, but only one of us forged a signature. She stood. Crane watched her walk out without moving from his chair. He set the coffee down and opened his laptop again. That afternoon, Laura drove to Riddle Lane and parked in front of the bay door. She sat in the car for several minutes before getting out. Inside, Adam was at the inspection station checking a part under magnification. He looked up when she stepped through the door. She told him everything. She stood on his shop floor and told him who she was, why she had come to Cedar Hollow, what Crane had done with the shell companies, what the forged consent said, and the fact that her own signature appeared on the authorization that made it possible. She didn't soften it. She didn't frame it as something that had happened to her. She laid it out the way Adam's logbook recorded tolerances, precise, measured, and without editorializing. Adam set the part down on the bench. He looked at her for a long moment. The shop was quiet. The lathe was off. The only sound was the overhead fluorescent and the faint hum of the ventilation fan turning in the wall. You knew, he said. Not at first. But once you figured it out, you stayed. I stayed to understand what was happening. And then you kept staying. She didn't have an answer for that. Adam took a step back. He looked around the shop, the lathe, the inspection station, the logbook, the crates ready to ship, the compass on the corner of the bench. Then he looked at her. You should go. Laura walked to her car and drove to the inn without turning on the radio. In the mirror, she could see Adam standing in the doorway of Paxton Precision, watching her taillights. Then he stepped inside, and the bay door came down. The compass sat on the workbench under the lamp, its needle pointing at nothing. Adam didn't open the shop the next morning. He sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold and replayed what Laura had told him. Not the specifics, those he could check. The shape of it. A company he'd never heard of. A man who had walked into his shop and lied to his face about eminent domain. A woman who had ridden in his truck and served chili at the fire station and asked him one afternoon if he'd ever thought about selling. In a voice he now understood had been trying to warn him without saying why. That evening Helen came over. She brought a casserole and sat with him on the porch. She waited until the coffee was poured before she asked, "What did she tell you?" Adam told her. Helen listened without interrupting. When he finished, she went inside and came back with a manila folder from the filing cabinet in the spare bedroom, the one that held his father's papers, untouched since the funeral. Inside was a property survey dated 1987, stamped by the county surveyor's office. Stapled to it was a conservation easement his father had filed with the Commonwealth of Virginia, restricting commercial development on the 3-acre parcel and preserving the mineral rights for the family. He filed this the year after they tried to run the highway spur through here, Helen said. Didn't make a fuss about it. Didn't tell anyone. Just filed the paper and went back to work. Adam held the document. His father's signature was at the bottom, the same steady hand that had marked bearings in that Compass's leather case for 30 years. In Richmond, Laura walked into the Keating Development offices for the first time in nearly 2 weeks. She didn't go to her office. She went directly to the boardroom and requested an emergency session. That same afternoon, she drove to the Attorney General's building on East Main Street and filed a formal complaint. The package she submitted contained the forged consent document, the suppressed county appraisal, the 3 shell company registrations, the batch authorization bearing her own signature with Cedar Hollow highlighted in the sequence, and a 6-page written statement accepting responsibility for inadequate oversight of her own acquisitions pipeline. She didn't call a lawyer first. She didn't negotiate terms or try to frame the narrative before it reached the AG's desk. She filed and walked out. Crane moved within 48 hours. He contacted 4 board members individually, casting the complaint as deflection, a young CEO overwhelmed by a deal gone sideways, pointing the finger at her most experienced executive to cover her own mismanagement. 2 of the 4 listened. 1 asked follow-up questions. The 4th called the company's general counsel directly. The general counsel pulled the consent document and Adam Paxton's business license from the Cedar Hollow County records. She commissioned a forensic handwriting analysis from an independent examiner. The results came back in 6 days. The signatures did not match. Not in slant, not in pressure, not in letter formation or character spacing, not in any measurable characteristic. The consent document had been forged. The general counsel distributed the analysis to every member of the board. Crane's phone call stopped working. The evidence was in the room. But whether it was enough to undo what had already been set in motion depended on what 7 people decided to do with it, and Laura would not be in that room to make the case. The board met on a Tuesday morning in the conference room where Laura had signed the quarterly batch 5 months earlier. The vote was 6-1. Douglas Crane was removed from his position effective immediately and referred to the Virginia Attorney General's office for criminal investigation, wire fraud, forgery, and misuse of corporate authority. The single dissenting vote came from a board member who had known Crane for 15 years and asked for additional review time. He reversed his vote by the end of the week. The Cedar Hollow acquisition was formally canceled. All adjacent parcel sales conducted through Crane's shell companies were frozen pending the AG's investigation. Keating Development issued a public statement acknowledging the fraud and committing to full cooperation. Laura submitted her resignation. The board asked her to reconsider. She declined. "I signed the documents," she said. "The oversight failed because I wasn't looking closely enough, and that is on me." She cleared her desk and walked out of the building her great-grandfather had built. In Cedar Hollow, Adam reopened the shop. The crew came back to their stations. The CNC lathe ran. Parts shipped. The structure of daily life resumed its shape, or something close to it. On a Saturday morning, Sam sat on his stool wearing the oversized safety glasses, holding a socket wrench Adam hadn't asked for yet. He was quiet for a while, which was normal. Then he looked up. "The lady who was here, is she coming back?" Adam tightened a clamp on the workpiece. Checked the alignment. Tightened it a quarter turn more. "She went back to Richmond." "I know, but is she coming back?" Adam didn't answer. He adjusted the clamp a 3rd time, though it didn't need adjusting, and turned the lathe on. That night, after Sam was in bed, Adam sat at the kitchen table and opened his laptop. He found Laura's public statement on the Keating Development website. She had named every affected property owner in Cedar Hollow, every family that Crane's shell companies had pressured into selling below market value. She named Adam. She described the forged consent. She detailed the suppressed appraisal and the batch authorization process that had allowed the fraud to pass without scrutiny. And she took full accountability, not for Crane's actions, but for her own distance. The distance between a signature in a conference room and the people that signature affected. She hadn't blamed Crane's deception or her own inexperience. She'd blamed the gap between the paperwork and the ground. The fact that a single site visit would have revealed everything in an afternoon. Adam read the statement twice. Then he closed the laptop and looked at the compass sitting on the kitchen windowsill, where he'd set it after closing the shop that afternoon. The needle pointed south, toward the road, toward the direction Laura had driven when she left. 3 weeks passed. The leaves in the valley turned, and the mornings got cold enough that Adam started the shop heater before the crew arrived. The AG's investigation moved forward. Crane retained a defense attorney. The frozen parcel sales began to unwind. Families receiving their land back at corrected valuations, paperwork reversed, titles restored. Cedar Hollow didn't make the Richmond papers. Small towns rarely do, even when the story deserves it. On a Thursday afternoon in late October, a car turned onto Riddle Lane. Not a rental. A dark green sedan with Virginia plates and a scratch on the rear bumper that came from parking in a city garage too many times. Laura Keating stepped out. She was wearing jeans and a jacket. No white dress. No designer bag. She had a manila folder in her hand. She walked toward the shop. Through the window, she could see Adam at the lathe. He saw her too. His hands kept moving. He finished the pass, powered down the machine, and stood there for a moment with his palm flat on the housing. Then he walked to the bay door and pushed it open. He didn't invite her in. He didn't tell her to leave. He stood in the doorway with his hands at his sides and waited. "I brought the easement filing back," she said. She held up the folder. "The AG's office made copies for the investigation. This is your father's original." Adam took the folder, opened it, looked at the signature at the bottom of the page, his father's hand, the same one that had carried the compass and written in the logbook and filed this paper 39 years ago without telling anyone. He closed the folder. "You didn't have to drive down for that," he said. "Could have mailed it." "I know." They stood there. The late afternoon light came through the bay door at a low angle and caught the metal shavings on the shop floor. Inside, one of the machinists glanced over, then looked away. "I'm not with the company anymore," Laura said. "I stepped down. I read that. I'm not here on business." Adam leaned against the doorframe. "Then why are you here?" She didn't answer right away. She looked past him at the shop, the lathe, the inspection bench, the logbook on the shelf, the crates stacked by the far wall, the compass on the workbench. "Your father filed that easement to protect this land," she said. "Not just from the highway, from whatever came after." He didn't announce it. He just filed it and went back to work. That was his way. "I spent 4 years trying to prove I deserved the chair I was sitting in. The whole time, the person I trusted most was using it to steal from people I'd never met." She paused. "I don't know what comes next, but I won't be that far from the ground again." Adam looked out at Riddle Lane. A pickup passed. The mail carrier waved. Adam raised a hand. "Fire department breakfast this Saturday," he said. "Helen's making chili." "Is that an invitation?" "It's information." Laura looked at him. Something shifted at the corner of her mouth, but she didn't let it land. From inside the shop, Sam appeared carrying a push broom taller than he was, sweeping metal shavings into a dustpan with the careful focus of a kid doing a job he'd given himself. He noticed Laura, stopped sweeping, and waved, the same unhurried wave his father had given the mail carrier. Then he went back to his work. Laura watched him. Adam watched her watching him. "You didn't have to come back," he said. "I know." Adam reached across the workbench and picked up the compass. He held it for a moment, the brass catching the last of the light. Then he set it on the edge of the bench closest to her. He didn't explain. He just placed it there, the way his father had placed the easement in a county filing cabinet 39 years earlier. Quietly, trusting that the right person would know what it meant. Laura looked at the compass. She didn't pick it up. Not yet. They stood in the doorway of Paxton Precision, the road stretching toward town, the October light going gold along the ridge. Neither of them moved to leave. They'd started in the same direction. Somewhere along the way, they'd arrived.